So you whose done the proclamation of the Dharma arises to purify delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, whose powerful sword of wisdom used our suffering wherever sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance. Ein Trichum and Joshu of princely bodies adorned with the 112 marks of the Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfection of the Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. O Manjushri, O loving one, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom so I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest assembly. From the accumulations I collect by listening to the teachings, may I attain this state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the by the accumulations I collect through listening to the teachings, may I attain the state of a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the highest assembly. From the accumulations that I collect while listening to the teachings, my attempt is to be able to benefit all sentient beings. All right. I'm your biggest fan. Sounds creepy, doesn't it?
Can I call you on that?
You have the biggest fan.
I have the biggest fan, yeah, but it's not very effective fan. Bigger is not necessarily better. Anyway, so what I thought of doing today was to look at maybe 3 or 4 secondary offenses. As Venerable Chuki said last week, we have the Bodhisattva vow happening in a couple of days. So we have about 6 secondary offenses to cover. I don't think that we'll be able to cover all of them today, but we can certainly push. So maybe what I suggest is, I think that what we've covered today and also on Thursday was quite simple, I think, in terms of it offers a few points that we're already familiar with. So I thought of just making sure that we got, first of all, that done, and then we're going to spend the second half of the session in looking at secondary offenses. Is that all right? All right. It's good to have some consensus. So just to recap, if we have happened to forget what we spoke of in the previous week when we started the Bodhisattva's chapter. So the definition of Bodhisattva is to be enthused about virtue, right? To delight in virtue. So therefore, the definition of laziness is being unenthused about virtue, right? So these two, you can say, are directly contradictory, being enthused or being unenthused about virtue. Bodhisattva versus laziness. Now, here we'll look at 3 types of laziness, and they're explained according to the causes that give rise to laziness. So laziness is altogether, it's the same type of laziness in being unenthused about virtue, but there are different conditions contributing to your lack of enthusiasm. So the first one that Shantideva mentions here is being idle or indolence. It's a nice word, indolence. It has a nice ring, I guess, though it's not positive attitude. Anyway, indolence. So you're procrastinating. You're not being active about virtue. Shantideva mentions in his text different reasons or different scenarios in which you're idle. You like sleep too much. You're just kind of, sorry? Yeah, I'm also in trouble.
If you've got a medical condition that makes you go to sleep.
Sorry?
What if you have a medical condition that requires you to get enough sleep?
Yeah, unless you have a mental condition, medical condition, that makes you go to sleep.
Makes you need sleep.
Makes you need sleep. Well, here we're looking at being unenthused about virtue, you know. So you could be very enthused about virtue, and yet you have a medical conditions. Like, for example, I think that half of our community is plagued by chronic fatigue.
Yes.
You know, so, you know, people want to do well, but it's not only chronic fatigue. You know, you have other conditions that make you really sleepy, drowsy, and so forth. So it is a physical necessity, and yet in your mind you still be enthused about virtue. So to have joyous effort does not necessarily mean that in all situations you have to actively be physically really vigorous about doing something. It's more like whether in your mind you're willing to take up virtues so long as you can, you know. So yeah. So of course, I think that if you have a medical condition, it's good to, you know, we consider the body to be like a ship, you know, the one that we can sail with to the safe shore of liberation. So we need to keep the ship going, and if the ship needs sleep or rest, this is what we need to do.
Also, His Holiness, I remember one time in Sydney, it was such a relief to my ears, said we all need to get a very good night's sleep, like 8 hours, you know, so that we're fresh, whether we're meditating or acting in the world or whatever, so that we have clarity.
So he said that His Holiness also made that comment once that, you know, we do need sleep. We, you know, if we need 8 hours sleep, to make sure that the body is rested in order to maintain mental clarity. I mean, I think that this point is really interesting, because when you look at the presentation from either, you can say sutra perspective, but mainly from a tantric perspective. From a tantric perspective, it says that you divide the night, which means 12 hours, into 3 sections, and you sleep only in the middle section. The first and the latter one should be set aside for practice, which means that all in all, it's like, since the implication would be that you sleep for 4 hours a night. That's the time that you allocate for sleep. But I think that that's probably the structure for a high-level practitioner, high-level tantric practitioner. If you push yourself now to do it and you're not ready for that, not only physically, but also mentally, it might be that you push yourself past the threshold, and it might cause you to completely, first of all, maybe your physical well-being and mental well-being to degenerate, but also it might cause you to give up the practice. So, no, we need to be sensible about it.
Yeah, when you said that, also, I think there's a little bit of probably a background as well, to develop some sort of stable karma body.
Yeah.
Whether it's full-blown karma body or not, develop the karma body, do nature without having to go to sleep.
So Jensen is saying that you had before also that when you develop karma binding, then karma binding rejuvenates you, gives you that, you know, special energy or edge, so that you need less sleep, right? All right.
I think Bodhisattva said at one point that it took him about 18 months or a couple of years to train himself not to sleep.
Lama Sovereign just said that it took him 18 months or 2 years to train himself not to sleep.
A higher level of practice.
Is that because
Right.
All right. So we spoke about, we mentioned laziness of idleness. Then there's laziness in which you're being attracted to certain activities, which are worldly activities, not dumb activities. You're addicted to entertainment, social interactions, and so forth, which means that I think that another way of looking at that is that your priorities are not set quite right from a Buddhist perspective, and not only, even more so from a Mahayana perspective. So again, when we think about it in terms of not just general how you would arrange your family life and work life and time with hang out with your friends and so forth, when you look at it in a very specific way, the way that you're training the Bodhisattva deeds, having developed bodhicitta, and having taken the manner of enlightenment, in which you thought to yourself, I have to attain the state of enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. This is the only way that I could be of benefit to sentient beings. If you then make that commitment, and then the next moment you go home, switch on the telly and watch Neighbors, you know, there's a discrepancy. Of course, You can do that when you take a break. If you need to get a bit of a rest, you can do that. But here Shantideva says, if you've made a promise, then make sure that your priorities are right. Of course, we can also look at what we need to do in the worldly situations. If we do need to go to work, we do have families, we do have friends, we do have things that we need to attend to. And yet, in terms of our priorities, if in our mind, our spiritual practice is of utmost priority, then we'll find the time to do it. Or we will make sure that we either wake up in the morning early to do it, that when we come back home, we do it. We'll find a way to do it if that is a priority. So that's the opposite of that laziness of being attracted to ignoble activities. Then the third one is laziness in which you look down on your own abilities. So, or laziness of discouragement. So we started to look at laziness of indolence in the previous week. So Shantideva then explains how you abandon the laziness that relishes the taste of idleness. So examining the causes of laziness and abandoning them. Shantideva spoke about lacking sleep, the pleasure of sleep, and so forth, and how to abandon them. He explains that in two sections: abandoning laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of laziness in this life, and abandoning laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of it in future lives. Altogether, this section very much pertains to the test of the path of beings of the small scope practitioners. So there's still many points that we need to think about in terms of the small scope. So Shantideva here touches upon meditation on death and impermanence, a precious human rebirth, and the suffering of miserable states of existence. So these are contemplations that help us to get a bum on the cushion, or in other situations, just make sure that we do whatever we need to do in order to study, reflect, and meditate. So what's interesting in that section is that Shantideva arranges that differently from a Lamrim point of view. From a Lamrim point of view, when you think of these three meditations, which meditation do you do first? Precious human rebirth. Then next to that, death and impermanence. And after that, you contemplate what will occur to you in future lives, the suffering of the miserable realms. Here, Shantideva arranges those meditations slightly differently, and it's okay. Here he's not explaining how to do a Lamrim meditation. He explains specific antidotes to laziness, which is also, I think, interesting when you look at that from the viewpoint of how Atisha and then Lama Tsongkhapa explained the states of the path to enlightenment. Indirectly, they spoke of laziness. So Lama Tsongkhapa and Atisha did not stop with speaking of laziness, but when you look at how they set up the scene for the progression along the steps of the path, first of all, they spoke of recognizing that we have the potential to secure something that is greater, the state of liberation and the state of enlightenment, and how terrible it would be if we don't use that potential, particularly when we think about it in terms of death and impermanence and what awaits for us in future lifetimes. So we draw conclusions from those meditations, like, for example, when we meditate on a precious human rebirth, then we recognize that we do have the ability to practice, that it is of a great significance, that we need to do it in this life because it is very hard to find freedoms and opportunities, and that we need to do it now because they are easily lost. And then the same conclusions, or very similar conclusions we get to when we think of death and impermanence. So death is certain, and therefore we have to practice the Dhamma. The time of death is uncertain, and therefore we not only have to practice the Dhamma in this life, but we have to start from now. And at the time of death, nothing will be of help apart from the Dhamma, and therefore what we need to do is to practice only Dhamma, in the sense that rather than practicing something else that will not be able to help us at the time of death, that we need to practice the Dharma. So we reach similar conclusions, which means that if we have to start from now, as Lama Tsongkhapa and Tisha say, they're also, you can say that they are indirectly, they antidote our sense of laziness, particularly when we think about it in terms of, if we don't do it in this life, and we end up in miserable state of existence, then it would be game over for us for a very long time, right? So we need to do it right from now. So this is how the Lamrim tradition speaks about it. So here Shantideva, as I said, it speaks about it in a slightly different order. It says, abandoning the laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of it in this life, and then abandoning laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of it in future lives. We've covered most of the verses in last week. Today we picked up from verse 10 that comes at the heading, or if you wish to pursue virtue from this moment forward, you will not accomplish what is necessary. So before we continue with that, I just wanted to briefly recall what are the disadvantages of not making the most out of a Dharma practice in this life. Which means that if we're lazy in this life, what are the disadvantages in terms of this life? The way that Shantideva mentions that. If you were to paraphrase, you can look at the verses. You don't have to necessarily have it in memory, but if you look at the verses and you try to kind of think to yourself, what are the disadvantages of laziness in this life? How would you summarize them?
We won't achieve the aim we set out to
We
do.
will not.
We won't achieve the aim of this life, which is what we set out to do
Yeah.
in the first place.
We will not achieve the aim of this life, which is what we set out to do. Yeah, that's one.
We won't have been virtuous.
We will not have been virtuous, which means that, no, I would paraphrase that, if you will not cultivate virtue. That would be a disadvantage of laziness. We will not cultivate virtue. And then?
We will have a miserable rebirth.
Well, in terms of this life.
You'll have wasted your time, and death will come, and
You will have wasted your time and death will come, and then
you suffer.
you suffer.
Suffering will arise.
Yeah, and this is one of the main points that Shantideva here is pushing. It says that think about, for example, how it would be like to know that you have a few days, a few hours to go. You have some clarity of mind still, and you reflect upon having had a chance to cultivate virtue, but you haven't done so. So your mind will, first of all, will be overcome with regret, but also it will be overcome with fear. So these two, I think, that kind of come together. Fear, because you know that you haven't done enough, or the opposite of that, if you haven't cultivated virtue, it also means that it is likely that you've done also many things that were non-virtuous. Not necessarily, but I mean, in general, from a Buddhist perspective, if we haven't had that deliberate effort to cultivate virtue, it is possibly that we were quite non-virtuous in our lives. So we will die with a sense of regret, and we will also experience suffering of fear in thinking of what will await for us in future lifetime.
Seems like it'd be stronger.
Sorry?
It seems like it seems like it would be stronger. So it's like put it up for lazy, we don't practice.
Yeah.
And the time of death comes. And then you sort of withdraw on that, sort of feel like, oh, I didn't really practice well, and then just feel confident and that.
Yeah, so you said that, in some sense, you can say that it can exacerbate your fear being on the time of death, which is also, I think, that the point that Serena brought up in a question at the end of Geshe-la's sessions. She said that, you can say that thinking about the way that we train it in the Dharma to think of death and impermanence, if you come to the moment of death, you can have even a greater sense of fear a greater sense of regret. So one way that, the way that Geshe-la answered that is that when you have that sense of fear, at least you have something that you turn to, which is the three objects of refuge. But also, I think that to add to that, in light of the discussion that we have now, during our life, we want to turn to the three refuge, to find reliance upon the three refuges. And if we do that properly, which means that we also take up the training in going for refuge, there will be less fear and anxiety being on the verge of death. So it's not only, I think that we have fear of what will await for us in future lifetimes because of not having cultivated virtue enough, or having done quite a lot of negativities, but also there would be the fear of having to be separated from everything that is dear to our heart, which is what Shantideva mentions here in this verse. He says that you're surrounded by the people that are close to you, family members and so forth, and there's a lot of lamentation going on. So we can think about it or visualize it, how it would be like to be on a deathbed, and to visualize how it would be like to die in knowing that you could have used your time better. And it doesn't mean that you have to become a monk or a nun, or that you have to withdraw from society or what have you. If you're a family person, of course, you have to take care of your family. But also, if you take good care of your family, if you teach, if you do it with values, if you do it with ethics, not only your family, but also your surrounding, that in itself is a good spiritual practice, which becomes informed by your Buddhist beliefs and knowledge. So if you do that, then you can die with a lessened sense of fear and regret.
I was going to say, especially said today in the past, the wisdom side of Dharma, the selfless, obviously, and the lessons here. It seems in my mind that it would be really important to because it seems like when we die, we haven't really let go of it.
When we die, we haven't
let go of it, so we're still grasping at being happy to justify.
Yeah.
And wisdom is the opposite of that. It's actually letting go of that and actually letting go of being more like this is fine. This is the natural process of life and death. It's much more peaceful and sort of being virtuous instead of letting me hang on to the eye and letting go.
So what Jason said, in relation also to a point that Geshe-la made in his session, was that if we develop wisdom, which means the wisdom of, let's say, selflessness in this life, it will help us to remedy the type of close holding to a sense of I that we might have at the time of death. So if we die with a sense of strong clinging to the I, to me, that would also give rise to a lot of fear. But if we develop the wisdom of selflessness and we just let go of the sense of grasping at the self, our mind would be much more at ease. We'd be able to let go easier. So our death will likely to be more peaceful. Yeah. Laudo.
He said, I knew nothing about emptiness.
Okay.
But the Laudo Lama, or the being known as the Laudo Lama, was going out of existence.
Okay, so he said that when he was on the verge of drowning, he says that he knew nothing about the emptiness of selflessness, but he kind of had that thought that occurred to him that this person or that being that is called the Laudo Lama, the Lama from Laudo, was about to go out of existence. That's nice.
So what had happened was he saw some white people on the other side of the river, and he was fascinated by them, and he wanted to give them potatoes, as you do in Bali, right? And but his manager said, don't.
Don't give them potatoes.
Well, he don't go there.
Yeah.
And he ran and slipped or whatever, fell into the water and was drowning. He couldn't swim, the manager couldn't swim. And just, I just let him drown. But anyway, he got saved. Yeah, yeah. No problem.
I worked a few times with Gengyatsan from the School of Dialectics in Dharamsala. It's an incredible teacher. And he tells also this similar story, but I think that with less, probably with a lesser type of wisdom, but still funny. He says that when he was in year 4 or 5 at school, they had school Olympics or competitions. So they asked, who wants to compete in swimming? So he immediately put his hand up, but he never been to the swimming pool. So he said, I'll compete. So they took all of them to the swimming pool. They all got behind the blocks. The whistle blew. He jumped into the water. And so he had no hesitation, just jumped into the water and he started drowning. Someone had to jump in and pull him out. So obviously he didn't win. Anyway, so Kerry says that also one of the disadvantages of laziness is freak out at death and do not pass, go, and straight to hell.
Monopoly game.
Sorry?
The Monopoly game.
Yeah. Yeah, there's kind of a lot of freaking out to do, I guess, at the time of death, unfortunately. So, I think that these are the disadvantages. Most of the disadvantages that Shantideva mentions with respect to laziness in this life. So just briefly reading through that. Because of relishing the pleasurable taste of indolence and craving based on sleep, from not being disillusioned with the suffering of samsara, laziness grows very strong. And mentioned in the snare of disturbing conceptions, you have entered the state of birth. Why are you still not aware that you have gone into the mouth of the Lord of Death, right? So death is certain. Do you not see that it's systematically slaughtering your species, and craving based on sleep is like a buffalo with a butcher, while the Lord of Death is looking, having blocked off every route? How can you enjoy eating? How thus can you enjoy sleep? Right. So this is again the certainty of death. For as long as death is quickly approaching, then I shall accumulate the collections. Even if I were to abandon laziness, then at that improper time, what would be the use, right? So if you do not cultivate virtue and you get to the moment of death or to the last days of your life, as Geshe-la said, it's already too late. So then what will be the use then to try to cultivate virtue when your mind is gripped with fear? But as Geshe-la said today, also, if you haven't done it before and your physical condition is weakened, how much will you be able to cultivate your mind with virtue? When your mind, particularly when you think of dying with some physical pain, where you might have to be on strong painkillers, which will take some of the edge of your mind. And if it doesn't take, if you don't take painkillers, your mind is so screaming with pain that it'd be more difficult to think of virtue if you haven't done it before. If you have done it before, of course, it would be still very uncomfortable, but there's, I think, some ways that you can still use the power of the mind. When
it's interesting though. It was interesting with that Harry Sutton, when his sister was dying.
Who's that? Sorry.
When his sister was dying, Harry Sutton, Harry from that PMT, Harry the Yogini, the yogi, the PMT yogi.
Okay.
Yeah, he's quite a real life thing, I'm sure. He was saying that his sister was taking a small amount of morphine just to sort of take the edge off. And her comment to Harry is that it didn't cloud her mind. It just took
That's
the
very
edge
good.
off. It just took the edge off. And yeah, it's interesting. Jason and I were talking about this during the break, and with what Geshe was saying that everybody experiences, that fear is a very common factor around death. Well, as an aged care nurse that's seeing a lot of it and also worked in palliative care, that's not my observation. I mean, sure, people do die with fear, but it's probably only a small minority. Most of them, by the time your death is upon you, people are well aware of it, and especially if you're an aging person, they're over it. The aggregates are done and dusted. They just want to move on with the discomfort. And if you're sensible, you've made peace with the world, with your family and stuff, and hopefully your family has made peace with you. So it's heading into death is like giving birth. There's a nesting instinct around it, and that there's things that you get together and sort out and organise. So when the time is upon you, it's something that generally speaking takes days. I've never seen people go from full-on alertness to being dead. And I'm not saying people lose their level of awareness, but it's alertness that I'm talking about as opposed to alertness. People's level of alertness declines as they withdraw in. But their awareness can remain quite, their awareness can be still quite with it, right up into the very end. In fact, even at the very end and beyond the very end. I certainly haven't had that feeling that even when somebody dies, they're well aware of what's going on. You get that feeling. So and I guess I don't think a lot of people do die with fear, but they don't necessarily die with virtue on their mind. I think that we as Buddhists, within our tradition, we know how critically important it is to have a virtue on your mind, to have compassion. If nothing else, is to have a mind of compassion and to die with compassion on your mind, wanting others to be well and happy. I think some people might stumble on it accidentally, But so I sort of disagree a bit with this concept that everybody has fear around death.
I think we have a lot of fear around death while we're very much alive.
Yes, I think that's perhaps more the point.
Bring it on, don't worry.
Yeah, that when we are fit and well, notice.
People don't like to talk about that. It's just all okay.
Yeah.
I was once in Taiwan, my first visit to Taiwan, and asked a good friend of mine how old she was. And I was like, her facial expression was as if I've just shot her dog.
Yeah, that's what I want you
It's
to
like,
say.
you never ask a woman how old she is because, might be indicative that she's closer to death.
Or you. We're all close.
How do we slip out of that one?
Not gracefully. Not gracefully. Not with grace. It's like, okay, don't ask that next time.
I sort of agree with all that. I think a lot of people probably do die since it is. I find out that my mind is that our mind is quite coarse. And as we dissolve, we need signs of this. And I think we're aware of it. Like some of our signs we call these coarse consciousness. Like, I don't know, it seems like there's something saying that that's where we're possibly come up.
That's what I was thinking, that we're not afraid of a sort of course level necessarily. But once those dissolutions start becoming over that, it becomes very clear. It's losing this self.
Yeah,
So it's the grasping of the self.
that's what I think about it. It's on a course level, it's like that, I think, it's subtle.
But then you hear people who talk about their near-death experience when they come back.
Yeah.
And they just say how wonderful it was.
Yes.
How difficult it was to want to come back. Like, you get to a certain point.
Yes.
And they say it becomes very blissful. So I mean, once you get through the voice cut. And that's before the bliss. I mean, the real bliss, the empty
No,
bliss.
that's before the mental dissolution.
Yeah, exactly. I think what it seems to me that they're talking about the light vision. They're a light vision, but they're experiencing that.
It's the white of, it's the, when the, it's after that.
So I'm just going to repeat for the people at home some of the points that you made here, because I think that Dechana has a good way of projecting a voice, but I'm not sure that people can hear Jason and Chukila. So you said that when we speak about having fear at the time of death, it might be also related to fear that arises when the process of dissolution kicks in, right? So you might have a lesser degree of fear leading up to death. We fear death in general throughout our life, right? So we don't speak about it that much in general in society. Some people, you could say that when they get old, they look forward for dying to a certain degree. But then there is also that particular type of fear that arises, or specific fear that could arise when the process of dissolution kicks in, when the earth element, for example, dissolves, and then you have that sensation of free falling or being sunk into the bottom of the earth. Or when the water element dissolves, you have this mirage-like appearance. So there could be some more, more particular type of fear when this kind of hits home that this is it. And you also experience things that you have not experienced before. Anyway, these are the drawbacks of laziness that Shantideva mentions here in this section. So then we have actually, let's look at a couple of more verses with respect to that, because we haven't read through all that sections. So then it says, when this has not been done, when this is initiated, and when this is only half done, suddenly the Lord of Death will come, and the thought occur, oh no, I'm doomed. The face is flowing with tears, and the eyes red and swollen with sorrow. My relatives will finally lose hope, and I shall behold the faces of the messengers of Yama. Tormented by the memories of negativities. This is what we started today. Tormented by the memory of my negativities and hearing of the sounds of hell. In terror, I shall clothe my body in excrement. What is the use of such a delirious state when we haven't cultivated virtue? Even if this life you shall be gripped with fear, let's just briefly look at the outline for this section. So abandoning laziness by reflecting on the disadvantages of laziness in terms of future life. Suffering is certain to arise. If we fall into a miserable state of existence, definitely there will be suffering for us. The suffering will be very difficult to bear. And it is contradictory to want happiness and yet cultivate virtue. So here, and not pursue virtue. Thank you. So here we meditate on the suffering of the miserable realms and how unbearable it would be for us. And then we have imploring one to pursue the methods by which one may be liberated from suffering in making good use of our freedoms and opportunities, freedoms and endowments. So if even in this life you shall be gripped with fear like that of a live fish being rolled, what need even to mention the unbearable sufferings of hell due to negativities you have committed, right? So it's good to not only think of the suffering of the hells, it's good to contemplate the sufferings of the Preta realms and also how it'd be like to be born as a fish. So why do you remain at ease like this, having committed the actions of hell? So we also think of karma actions and its results, where your delicate flesh will burn when touched by streams. Much harm befalls those who want results without striving, as well as those sensitive ones. While collapsed by death, I shall wail like the gods, oh no, I shall be destroyed by suffering. So then the last one is calling us to make the most out of our freedoms and opportunities, relying upon the human boat. Free yourself from the great river of suffering, as it is hard to find this boat later. do not sleep at this time full.
It's
When I-
a shame. It's a shame he doesn't take it that one point further to say the minimum that you should do on a daily basis is 6 hours.
Is 6 hours.
So, you know,
Yeah.
I'm just putting out there.
Okay.
If you're doing 6 hours a day, yeah, that's the minimum you should do to not be considered lazy.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's
You won't be given no guideline for what's lazy and what's not.
exactly. I want the outline, the guideline.
You want the yardstick of.
That's right. I want the yardstick. He takes it to that, but he doesn't provide the yardstick
About personal yardstick.
on what is considered lazy and what is not considered lazy. I mean, you look at Lovis on Carver, and he sets the yardstick very.
Well, probably Shanty David would too, so
Yeah,
they don't watch his yards.
although he had a terrible reputation.
Yeah, he did have quite a bit of a reputation.
He was lazy. No, no. Yeah, so.
I think that, you know, the thing is that it's hard to come by a yardstick which would be very accurate, because we might find ourselves busy doing something, you know, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, while not really being enthused about it. We just go through the motion because we do it. But it's not necessarily that you have that sense of joy and delighting in doing that. I think that, you know, I can just say that I'd say that from a personal perspective, for example, you know, I have everyday classes that I need to translate for. You know, so I go through the motion. I have to show up to class. I have, you know, tutorials and so forth. I can do that with a sense of joy, with really delighting in virtue, or I can do it just because I have to do it. You know, so I have to really push myself at some point to, you know, to be joyous about it. So if you try to come up with a yardstick saying that you have to do it at least 3 hours a day, it doesn't mean to say that you're really enthused about it.
There's so many positive conditions that come into effect, and given, you know, we talk about this being a time of great degeneration, where therefore it's harder to practice Dharma, so therefore it requires more effort, so therefore you're accumulating more virtue, and there's so many.
Well, and I just think it's unrealistic too to have a high level of energetic, because, you know, energy all the time. I mean, of course, you're going to have your ups and downs, and because that's just the nature of being
You know,
human.
if you ask one, it's like you get a very long list.
I think that, you know, the yardstick is still, I think that it comes down to the basic point of whether you still have enthusiasm about it, whether you still delight it, which I think that, you know, sometimes you come across people that gave back the vow, ordination vow or something else, and or that have stopped doing a particular practice, left the retreat or what have you. And we have a way of speaking about it. Like, for example, we said that my karma ran out. I had obstacles, so it seems that my karma ran out for this activity. But actually, you know, the way that I think about it normally is we lost enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And it's not a bad thing to say, you know, when we lose enthusiasm, that's what happens. If we're enthusiastic about doing something, it's still very important to us. If we're not enthused about it, it's no longer important, then things then get in between. You know, we face more inconducive conditions. Inconducive, is that a word? Unconducive, non-conducive. Maybe I can.
That's what we just like to make excuses.
Yeah.
We don't say, well, I lost enthusiasm. It's always something else or something.
Yeah.
I think Ray's issue commented on that, you know, you end up doing your commitments very late at night in your half sleep because you've done everything else in the day, but do your actual done practice.
So Katie is asking, is it negative to practice without joyous effort? No, I don't think that it's negative to practice. At the very least, you create positive imprints. I think that, you know, we have, for example, if we've taken some empowerments and we have daily commitments, I think that as it happened to us, you know, at least it happens to me. I don't know if it happens to you as well, but there are days that you don't feel like doing it. But still you think that I have a commitment, therefore I have to do it. So you're just going to recite what you have to recite. It doesn't mean to say that you're doing it with like being totally enthused about doing it. So it's still good to do it rather than not doing it at all. And even if you don't have joyous effort, you're still building up habits. If you build up habits, it's easy then to slot in joyous effort when your conviction in the Dharma grows stronger, when your conviction in karma grows stronger, then you become more enthused about it. It gains
And in fact,
momentum.
that helps you become like your conviction, because it's like you're keeping the discipline of at least doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, it helps you to gain momentum, to build your conviction, to gain joyous effort.
Seems like it breaks it down to is doing repetition of
Yes.
activity.
Yeah.
You're a lot more likely to fall into joyous effort arising.
And also I think that when you do, even if you don't have a lot of enthusiasm, you have some commitments that you have to do, or sometimes there's still some other practices that you do, you still, to a certain degree, accumulate merit, and you purify negativities and obscurations. And when you do that, then there's more room for the arisal of joyous effort. Those are also conditions that support joyous effort. Of course, here we'll look at how we remedy laziness, but also just in order to have the conditions for doing that, we need merit, and we need to have less obscurations and negativities. So even if you're not totally enthused about it, you're still contributing to that.
I was just thinking, it's a little bit of a segue, but Bodhisattva was talking, commentary one point about, you have the karma, say, or you've got all the conditions or the merit to go on retreat, but then all the obstacles arise, so you don't actually start your retreat. So it takes each step that we take takes a huge amount of merit that we don't realise until hidden, but we only realise when it's difficult. So we're falling together.
Olaf is saying, as the ego structure is slowly withered away, joyous effort will surely arise in a natural way. Or if your ego structure is diminishing, in a sense that, at least from a Dharma perspective, you have a lessened sense of self-grasping, but also, let's say that you have a lessened sense of cherishing yourself, which is also, it is paired together with a sense of self-grasping. So if you have less self-grasping and therefore less grasping at cherishing the self, I think that naturally you will have a greater degree of joyous effort. Yeah, so you're right, Olaf. Sorry? Yeah, it's a principal obstacle, grasping at the self. Well, I think that when you look at our lifestyle, for example, we're so pampered by the comforts of the 21st century. We think that we need so many good conditions, comfortable conditions to practice. We have to have perfect food for practice, perfect food for retreats, perfect room, perfect surrounding, outside and inside and so forth. In all of that, there is also a strong sense of I. If I don't get the good conditions for that I need, I'm not going to be able to do the practice. So if we can relax some of that grasping at the self, we'll be more enthused about not only the practice, but also working with conditions that are not necessarily completely comfortable to our practice. All right, so we have 10 minutes left, so let's maybe cover at least one or two secondary offenses. So we have covered 40 secondary offenses. Let's look at 41. If out of bitterness or laziness, you do not give food or drink to someone who asks for them, it is a secondary offense of not acting generously towards those seeking material assistance. It's quite straightforward. Here it says, if you do not give food or drink. In other commentaries and texts that I've seen, it says, if you do not give material things in general, not only food or drinks, but someone is asking for you for something, help with money, help another type of thing, material things. If you don't give them out of bitterness or laziness, It is a secondary offense of not acting generously towards those who seek material assistance. So, a couple of points that I wanted to make. First of all, do you remember the second root downfall? Not sharing my wealth for the Dharma. Yeah, not sharing my wealth. So we had something similar to that in the second root downfall. So what's the difference between not sharing my wealth, as in the second root downfall, to here when it says that when someone asks you for help, you don't share it? Well, one way that you can distinguish between them is in terms of the motivation for not sharing your wealth. Before, when we looked at the secondary offense, the root downfall in the second root downfall, it was out of attachment. So if out of attachment, someone asks you for help and you don't do that, it is a root downfall. Here it is said that it is due to laziness and bitterness.
What if I offer help and it's not that?
What if?
Clearly there's a need for help, and if I've stepped up and gone, yes, I will help you, they go, no, I don't want it. There is this sort of a request for help, but somehow they say, no, I don't need help. Am I bad?
So I'm not clear about what you're saying. You're saying that you offer to help, but they're saying that.
Situation where help is needed.
Yeah.
One steps up and says, I will help you. There is a request out there for help. I step up, whoever, I will help you, and then nothing happens. Nothing's happening from it. Is it you in the wrong? What's the go? I've done something wrong. I've done something wrong.
Yeah. Well, if you offer help and then at the end, your help is not taken, or they say that sorry, I don't need it, or no one takes up your offer, you're not at fault here. No, the fault here is that if someone is asking you for help, and from your side, either you can't be bothered, or because you have a sense of bitterness about the situation, about the person, about something, and you think that I don't want to help them. So this is the fault that is discussed here.
That's all there.
So then, one way that we can distinguish between the second root downfall, where you don't help because of attachment, and here because of laziness or bitterness. That's one way. Also, Tubten Chodron in her commentary, she says, and that's based on. She says that it's based on teachings that she got from other lamas. So it's not just her ideas, also other teachings that she got. She says that it seems that there might also be difference in terms of the importance of the situation. For example, if someone is asking you for help, material assistance, it's really crucial. It's a situation that is really significant, and you refuse to do it because of attachment. It's a serious thing. In the secondary offense, it might be that what they're asking you for something, but it's not as important as the thing that is involved with the second root downfall. So what is it? No, it's not stated very specifically. So, but we can think of certain things, like for example, someone is in a really dire state. They're asking you for help, and you're refusing to do it because of attachment. Or there is, for example, a beggar that you see every day. You know that they're begging every day. If you give them sometimes, one day you don't give them because of laziness, let's say. So you can say that maybe in the case of beggar, they're asking you to give something, they're asking you regularly, but maybe it's not as significant as someone that is in a really dire situation and there's something crucial that is happening and looking for help, and you're refusing to help them. So that could also be the difference between a root downfall and a secondary offense. It's not stated clearly here. It's not stated at all, but maybe that's one way that we can make distinctions.
That self-grasping, which is counter to the Bodhisattva attitude as opposed to laziness, bitterness,
Yeah.
while they're affecting states, and not necessarily the direct opposite to self-cherishing.
So Kate is saying, I feel a bit surprised that attachment is a stronger offense than bitterness towards others. It's interesting that the text says bitterness rather than anger.
Yeah.
Since the bitterness is more involved with, more related to being unhappy. I have to look at the Tibetan to see whether it refers to resentment or just being unhappy. I have to look at it.
When you say bitterness, it's almost like it's very personal, like you've had a lunch. Yeah, I mean, you don't just, you're bitter when it's affected personally, you know, you get bitter, you don't get, in situations where you get angry, it's different to feeling bitter. You know, bitter, long-lasting anger, you don't suddenly become bitter, you get angry and it lasts for a long time.
Yeah, there's a secondary mental factor called resentment, where something has happened before you got angry, and then you're still bitter about it, thinking that in the future, if I'll get an opportunity, I will harm that person back.
And that's it, according to the dictionary, that's what it is. Feeling of showing anger, hurt, or resentment because of bad experiences or a sense of unjust treatment. Yeah, it is a point personal, between you and somebody else.
Somebody who don't know something happened, you would be angry at them, you wouldn't just go bitter.
Because attachment would be in general.
Well, attachment is, it's mine.
It's mine, yeah, because that's who you are, it's mine.
Yeah. Don't need to know you, it's mine.
Well, when you look at the 6 root afflictions, attachment is one of the 6 root afflictions, which means that from attachment as a root affliction, many other afflictions develop. When you look at secondary afflictions, laziness is a secondary affliction, but also resentment is a secondary affliction, which means that it arises out of laziness, out of attachment, which makes attachment become more dominant in just from the point of view of being a basis for many other afflictions that arise. Maybe that's the reason. So we have 1 minute. Should we leave it here for now? Or cover another one? Sorry? Leave it here. All right. Take it or leave it. Let's leave it. I don't want to take on those secondary offenses.
So there's not tomorrow.
Well, there will be tomorrow, but there will be no session tomorrow. Well, I don't know if there will be tomorrow. I assume that there will be tomorrow, but there will be no session tomorrow. Yeah.
And
we could have had actually a session from the plaza.
From the what?
The Sunshine Plaza.
Sunshine Plaza.
Could have had Sunshine City.
Yeah.
Could have had
Could
Sunshine
have.
City at Sunshine Plaza.
Could have kind of got together with Geshe at Coffee Club and just said a yeah. Have a salmon on the next to the sushi train.
And is there going to be one on Thursday? Maybe not.
Well, there is a session at 10:30. So, yeah, the Bodhisattva vow. I guess that Geshe will speak about bodhicitta and the Bodhisattva vow. So
In the afternoon.
in the afternoon, no, because there is
A teaching from Lama Zogyet.
there is the Lama Sopa Rinpoche Shebang.
So if you choose to take Bodhisattva vows,
Yeah.
is there a daily commitment?
Well, normally there are no daily commitments that are given with the Bodhisattva vow. There are.
Yeah, no recitation. It's assuming you will keep the vows on a daily
Yeah.
basis.
Well,
Usually you have to recite those 2 times.
well, it says that kind of the within. You can use those verses for taking up the Bodhisattva vow every day. Those 2 verses. I assume that this is what you mean. Also, I think that probably your commitment when you take the Bodhisattva vow is to train in abandoning the 4 dark practices and taking on the 4 white practices, the positive practices. And Lama Tsongkhapa explains them in the Lamrim Chenmo. I think that maybe I put some notes in my tutorial notes about them, but it's more like what you need to do to train daily it, to make sure that the mind of enlightenment does not decline in this life, and that the mind of enlightenment also does not decline in future lives. All right. Let's dedicate. To this virtue, my becoming Guru Buddha and lead all transmigrative beings without exception to that state. May the precious Supreme Bodhisattva not yet born arise. May that arisen never decline, but increase more and more. In this land encircled by snowy mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful to embrace the cleansing gates of misery until samsara ends. You uphold the subduer's moral way, yourselves the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels. Protector of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Thank you, people.
So maybe soon I'll discover raptures.
You've done it really well, actually.
I'm
You
just
practice
putting it
it
to the
quite
test. It's
often.
my hypothesis.
You the practice of writing down that.
It seems to be pretty consistent, so I think I can write up the theory.
Yes,